The sound that broke our marriage wasn't a shout or a slammed door, or even the screech of tires in the night. It was the whisper, soft thud of a woman's wallet hitting a hallway floor. Diane's wallet. She was fumbling for her keys, a strained smile plastered on her face as she tried to juggle her purse, a bag of groceries, and the mail. I moved to help her, a reflex honed over a decade of shared life. But my eyes snagged on the small, rectangular slip of yellow carbon paper that had fluttered free from the wallet's overstuffed guts. It lay there, innocuous, almost invisible against the honey-colored oak of our floorboards. A receipt. My hand closed on it before my brain had fully processed the action. Her name, Diane Thorne, was at the top. Below it, an address I recognized with a jolt of cold confusion. A pawn shop on the grimy side of town, the kind of place with faded neon signs and barred windows. And then the line item that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. 1X Ladies, 1.5 CT diamond ring, vintage setting. Sold 3 hours ago for $400. My grandmother's ring, the one I'd placed on Diane's finger under a canopy of old-growth pines, the sun filtering through the leaves as we promised each other forever. The one she swore she'd never take off. Not for anything in the world. Its value wasn't in the carat or the cut, but in the 70 years of happy marriage it had already witnessed on my grandmother's hand. It was a legacy, a symbol of enduring love. And it was gone, bartered away for the price of a used television. A metallic tang, sharp and acidic, flooded my mouth. Betrayal. It wasn't just a word in a book anymore. It was a physical sensation, a poison seeping into my bloodstream. My hand, the one holding the flimsy yellow paper, began to shake. It was a tremor that started in my fingertips and radiated up my arm, a seismic shockwave of realization. "Find your keys?" I asked, my voice sounding unnervingly normal, a stranger's voice in my own throat. "Oh, finally," she laughed, a brittle, tinkling sound. She pushed the door open, her back to me. She hadn't seen me pick it up. They were hiding in the side pocket, the little terrors. She bustled into the kitchen, the grocery bag crinkling, blissfully unaware of the grenade that had just detonated in the hallway. I stood frozen, the receipt clutched in my fist. $400. The number seemed absurdly small, an insult layered on top of the injury. What could possibly be worth so little yet cost so much? And then, like a camera lens snapping into focus, another piece of paper came to mind. It was sitting on our kitchen counter, propped against the fruit bowl, where it had been for 3 days. A thick, cream-colored envelope with a stark, red-stamped warning. Final notice. The bank, the foreclosure. A word so ugly I hadn't been able to fully look at it. I'd assumed it was a mistake, a bureaucratic snafu. We were comfortable. I made good money as an architect. We had savings. Or so I thought. Suddenly, the foreclosure notice wasn't a mistake. It was a motive. The 2 pieces of paper, the yellow receipt in my hand and the red-stamped notice in the kitchen, were part of the same terrible story. A story I was only just beginning to read. 18 hours. The thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. Our anniversary dinner. Tomorrow night. I'd made reservations at Colleen, the place she'd been dreaming of for years, a rooftop restaurant with city lights that glittered like scattered jewels. I had imagined us sitting there, clinking glasses, celebrating 11 years of what I believed was a partnership, a team. Now, the thought of it was a mockery. What would she wear on her finger? A lie? An empty space where a promise used to be? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Panic was a rising tide, threatening to pull me under. I wanted to storm into the kitchen, to wave the receipt in her face, to demand an explanation, to scream until my throat was raw. But some cold, hard instinct, a survival mechanism I didn't know I possessed, took over. It clamped down on the rage, on the grief, on the confusion. Not yet. An open confrontation would give her control. She would cry. She would have a story, a justification wrapped in desperation that would be designed to make me the bad guy for being angry. I knew her. I knew how this would play out. No. This required something else. Not fire, but ice. I carefully, deliberately, smoothed the crease from the yellow receipt. My hands were steadier now, fueled by a purpose that was chillingly clear. I folded the paper into a neat square and slid it deep into my trouser pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone. "Everything okay, honey?" she called from the kitchen. I could hear the refrigerator door open and close. I took a breath, summoning a ghost of the man I had been 5 minutes ago. "Yeah, perfect," I called back, my voice an echo of a life that was already over. "Just grabbing the mail." I walked into the kitchen, a smile carved onto my face. She was putting away milk, her left hand braced on the counter. The bare, pale skin, where my grandmother's ring should have been, was turned away from me. Hidden. She knew. She had been consciously hiding it. The premeditation of it all was what truly broke me. She looked up, her smile bright and oblivious. "Tired?" she asked. "You look a little pale." "Long day," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "I think I'll just relax a bit before we figure out dinner." As I walked past her, my fingers brushed against the cool, unforgiving stone in my pocket. I wasn't just going to relax. I was going to dismantle our life, piece by painful piece, before it completely collapsed on top of me. Our anniversary was in 18 hours. The mortgage payment was due in 6 days. And for the first time in our marriage, I had a secret of my own. The morning light was gray and unforgiving, stripping the color from our bedroom. I had watched it creep over the windowsill, having not slept for a single minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pawn shop receipt, the stark black letters on the sickly yellow paper. Diane slept beside me, a deep, untroubled sleep, her breathing even and slow. The sight of it filled me with a quiet, seething rage. How could she rest so peacefully while our world was crumbling, while a piece of my family's soul was sitting under a dusty glass counter somewhere? I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound. In the sterile quiet of my home office, the plan that had been cementing in my mind all night felt less like a choice and more like a necessity. It was a desperate act of self-preservation. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the number for our bank's customer service line. This was the point of no return. The hold music was a tinny, soulless rendition of a classical piece I couldn't name. It grated on my already frayed nerves. Each second that passed was a second I could lose my resolve, a second I could default to the familiar path of confrontation and eventual, reluctant forgiveness. But the image of her bare finger, the calculated way she had hidden it, kept my spine rigid. "Good morning. You've reached United Mutual Bank. This is Brenda speaking. How can I help you today?" The voice was cheerful, automated. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my own voice a low croak. I cleared my throat. "I need to report suspected fraudulent activity on my accounts." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. "Okay, sir, I can certainly help with that. Can I get your full name and the account numbers you're concerned about?" I gave her my name, Marcus Thorne. I read off the numbers for our joint checking, our joint savings, the accounts we had built together, the financial bedrock of our marriage. With each digit, I felt a cord snap. "And can you describe the nature of the suspected fraud?" I hesitated. What could I say? My wife pawned my grandmother's ring to cover a debt I didn't know existed. It sounded insane. It sounded pathetic. I have reason to believe that funds are being withdrawn and transferred without my authorization, I said, the corporate speak feeling safer, more detached. I'd like to place an immediate freeze on all accounts, checking, savings, credit lines, everything. Lock it all down. Nothing moves in or out without my express verbal and in-person consent. I understand, sir. For security purposes, once the freeze is in place, all cards associated with these accounts will be deactivated, and no transactions will be permitted. This will apply to all account holders. That's exactly what I want, I said, the confirmation leaving a bitter taste. There were more questions, security verifications, the dull minutiae of financial protocol that felt surreal under the circumstances. Finally, Brenda's cheerful voice returned. All right, Mr. Thorne. The freeze has been activated on all specified accounts. A new set of security protocols are in place. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, Brenda, I said, a wave of cold resolve washing over me. You've been a great help. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my office. The house was still quiet. Outside, the world was waking up. Cars starting, birds chirping, the mundane sounds of a normal Tuesday morning. But inside our home, I had just flipped the master breaker switch on our life. I had cut the power. It took less than an hour. My phone rang, and her name flashed on the screen. Diane. I let it ring, watching the screen light up and go dark, over and over. A text message followed immediately. Marcus, my card just got declined at the gas station. It's embarrassing. Can you call me? I stared at the message. The banality of it. A declined card at a gas station was almost comical compared to the chasm that had opened up between us. Another call. I ignored it again. Then another. This time I answered. I leaned back in my chair, the leather cool against my skin, and prepared myself. Marcus? What the hell is going on? Her voice wasn't confused anymore. It was sharp, edged with panic. My debit card was declined, my credit card was declined. I tried to pull cash from the ATM and it said the account was restricted. What did you do? The accusation was immediate, not what happened. But what did you do? She knew. On some level, she knew this wasn't a random glitch. I kept my own voice level, cold, a perfect mirror of the ice that had formed around my heart. I froze the accounts. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the distant whoosh of traffic, the sounds of the world she was suddenly locked out of. You what? Why? On what grounds? You can't just do that. I can, I replied calmly. I cited suspected fraudulent activity, which, as it turns out, wasn't a lie. Fraudulent? What are you talking about? The indignation in her voice was a masterpiece of performance. For a brief, insane moment, I almost doubted myself. And then I let the first shoe drop. $400, Diane? That's all she was worth to you? My grandmother? The silence that followed was different. It wasn't stunned. It was guilty, heavy, suffocating, and absolute. I had her. The pawnshop receipt in my pocket felt like a loaded gun I had just fired. How? She whispered, her voice cracking. The performance was over. How did you find out? You're not as careful as you think you are, I said, the coldness in my voice surprising even myself. The more important question isn't how I found out, it's why you did it. Marcus, you don't understand, she started, the familiar pleading tone creeping in, the one she used when she'd overspent or forgotten something important. I can explain. I was going to get it back, I promise. I just needed... Don't, I cut her off, the single word sharp as a razor. Don't you dare tell me you were going to get it back. You sold a piece of my family, a piece of our story, for $400. You didn't ask me. You didn't talk to me. You stole it, Diane, from me, from us. And you did it behind my back while smiling in my face. I had to, she cried, the desperation raw now. There was no other way. There's always another way, I shot back. The way we were supposed to do things was together. You broke that. You broke everything. So what, you just turn off all our money? You leave me stranded with no way to even buy gas? Same way you meant to pawn my ring without asking, I replied, the words tasting like victory and ash. I didn't wait for her response. I ended the call, the silence in the room rushing back in to fill the space where her voice had been. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the manicured lawn we'd spent weekends perfecting. On the counter, the foreclosure notice sat, a silent monument to our ruin. The mortgage payment was due in 6 days. 6 days until the bank could officially begin proceedings to take our home. Before yesterday, that deadline was our shared crisis. Now it was my leverage. I had frozen the accounts. I had the liquid assets, what little was left of them anyway. I held all the cards, and for the first time since I'd found that cursed yellow receipt, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. I felt power. The heat of the afternoon was oppressive, the kind that makes asphalt soft and the air shimmer above the pavement. It was a fitting backdrop for the scene unfolding in front of me. I was parked across the street from a grimy, two-bay auto shop called Trevor's Tune-Up, the name painted in cheerful, peeling letters that belied the building's state of decay. My brother-in-law's kingdom of rust and grease. My air conditioning was blasting, but a nervous sweat still trickled down my back. I'd been here for an hour, watching, waiting. After our phone call, Diane had gone dark. My texts went unanswered. I knew she wouldn't come home. She couldn't face me, and I knew exactly where she would run. To him, Trevor. He was the son Diane had always orbited, a chaotic, charming black hole of a man who could talk his way into and out of anything. He was family, her family, and in her eyes, that forgave a multitude of sins. The perpetual get-rich-quick schemes, the string of failed businesses, the constant need for a short-term loan that was never paid back. I'd tolerated him for Diane's sake, writing him off as a harmless screw-up. I was beginning to understand how wrong I'd been. A beat-up sedan, Diane's car, was parked haphazardly near the entrance. Through the large, grease-smeared window of the shop's waiting area, I could see them. Diane was pacing, her hands gesturing wildly. Trevor was leaning against a counter, arms crossed, his expression a mask of bored indifference. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel the desperate energy radiating from her. She was begging. I killed the engine, the sudden silence making the scene feel more immediate, more theatrical. I watched as her pleading seemed to intensify. She grabbed his arm. He shook her off, his face twisting into a snarl. This was it. I rolled down my window, the humid, gasoline-scented air hitting me like a wave. Their voices, faint at first, carried across the empty street. Can't believe he did it, Trev. He just cut me off, everything. Diane's voice was high-pitched, frantic. Trevor let out a harsh laugh, a sound like grinding gears. What'd you expect, Di? You pawned his granny's ring. The guy's not a complete idiot. I did it for you! For us! She shrieked, her voice cracking. I didn't have a choice! Yeah, well, choices have consequences, he said, kicking at a loose tire. He wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder. He looked cornered. Then, his demeanor shifted. He stood up straight, his lazy posture gone, replaced by a tense energy. He slammed a heavy wrench he'd been holding onto a metal workbench. The clang was so sharp and violent it made me flinch in my car. "This is not helping, Diane," he yelled, his voice a low growl that carried clearly in the still air. He jabbed a finger in her direction. $400 is a freaking drop in the bucket. It doesn't even cover the interest for this week." He stormed towards the small, cluttered office at the back of the garage, a place I'd only ever seen filled with dusty parts catalogs and unpaid invoices. Diane, like a puppy that had just been kicked, trailed right behind him, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "You promised!" she shouted, her voice echoing slightly from inside the office. "You promised me this whole gambling thing was handled. You swore you were done with it." I leaned forward, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Gambling. Of course. It was the missing piece, the ugly, simple answer to a question I hadn't even known how to ask. All the times Trevor had been flush with cash, followed by weeks of being broke. The vague stories about a hot stock tip or a surefire investment. It was all a lie. Trevor's voice erupted from the office, no longer a growl, but a full-throated roar of pure desperation. "Tell that to the guys who want their 50 grand by Friday. Tell them it's handled. You think these are guys you can reason with? They don't care about promises, Diane. They care about cash. $50,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. It sucked the air from my lungs, from the car, from the entire world. It was an astronomical, impossible sum. Our savings, before they had been mysteriously drained, had never come close to that. The foreclosure, the ring, Diane's panic, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The $400 wasn't a solution. It was a pathetic, desperate gesture, like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. I felt a wave of nausea. My wife had not just betrayed me, she had chained our shared future to the anchor of her brother's catastrophic addiction and was actively helping him sink us to the bottom of the ocean. Then came the final, brutal twist of the knife. "This is your mess, Trevor," Diane sobbed, her voice muffled but audible. "You dragged me into this." His reply was low, dripping with a venom that was clearly meant to wound, to shift the blame, to make her pain his shield. "Yeah, well, maybe your husband shouldn't have married into a family of losers then. Did you ever think of that? He's playing Mr. High and Mighty in his fancy architect office while we're down here in the dirt. He doesn't get it. He never will." A family of losers. The words hung in the air, an epitaph for my marriage. He wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about them, a unit, a package deal I had unknowingly signed up for. And in that moment, I realized Diane's loyalty was never truly with me. It was a tribal instinct, a deep, unbreakable bond to the dysfunction she came from. She wasn't my partner in building a life. She was his accomplice in burning one down. I sat in my car as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in lurid shades of orange and purple. The oppressive afternoon heat gave way to the first hints of a cool evening chill, but I didn't feel it. I was encased in a block of ice. The scope of their deception, the sheer scale of the debt, the misplaced loyalties. It was a rabbit hole that went deeper than I could have ever imagined. I had come here looking for a confession. I left with a declaration of war. They thought I didn't get it. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The drive home was a blur. The city lights smeared past my windows, a watercolor painting of a life I no longer felt a part of. The conversation I'd overheard at the auto shop played on a continuous, tormenting loop in my head. 50 grand? Family of losers? He doesn't get it. I got it all right. I got that I had been a resource, a safety net they felt entitled to cut away piece by piece to patch the holes in their own sinking ship. When I walked into the house, it was dark and silent. A tomb. Diane wasn't there. A small, vindictive part of me was glad. I couldn't have looked at her. I couldn't have maintained the cold facade I was trying so hard to build. The anger from this afternoon had curdled into something heavier, a deep, profound sorrow. I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing the entire reality I had built for the last 11 years. Every memory was now tainted, every shared laugh a potential lie. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand shaking slightly. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the foreclosure notice. It no longer seemed like the primary threat. It was just a symptom of the disease. The $50,000 debt was the cancer, and it was malignant. My phone buzzed on the counter, startling me out of my stupor. It was a text from my sister, Sarah. "Hey, just got home. Let me know if you want me to come over, or if you just want to talk. Thinking of you." Sarah, my anchor. She was a forensic accountant, a woman who lived in a world of numbers and spreadsheets, where everything had to add up and balance out. When I had called her after freezing the accounts, I'd given her the bare bones version. Diane had pawned the ring, and I suspected serious financial trouble. I'd asked her if she could, in her professional capacity, take a discreet look at the digital statements I had access to see if I was crazy. I typed back a simple reply. "Can you talk now?" Her call came through a second later. "Marcus, are you okay? You sound awful." "Define okay," I said, my attempt at humor falling flat. "I just spent my afternoon conducting some light surveillance on my wife and her deadbeat brother." "Oh God, what did you find out?" Sarah's voice was all business now, the sisterly concern overlaid with professional focus. I recounted the scene at the auto shop, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of anger and disbelief. I told her about the shouting, the desperation, and the number that felt like a physical weight in my chest. $50,000, Sarah. He owes $50,000 to gamblers." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. For a moment, she was silent. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. It was grave. "Marcus, I'm glad you called," she said slowly. "I was going to wait until I had everything confirmed, but you need to hear this now. I've been digging through the last 6 months of your joint account statements. It's worse than you think." "Worse than 50 grand?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "The 50 grand is just the tip of the iceberg," she said, her voice low and serious. "That's what Trevor owes. I'm more concerned with where the money he's been getting has been coming from. There are dozens of small to mid-sized transfers from your joint savings account to Diane's personal checking account, an account I didn't even know she had. We're talking 500 here, 1,000 there, over and over. It adds up to almost $30,000 over the last year alone." I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. 30,000. Our savings. The money for a new roof, for a trip to Italy, for a future that was now a fantasy. It had been systematically siphoned away. "She was feeding his habit," I whispered, the realization dawning on me. "She was bleeding us dry to keep him afloat." "She was," Sarah confirmed. "But that's not the worst part. I started running some of the names on the outgoing wire transfers from his business account, the ones Diane was funding. These aren't just local bookies, Marcus. One of the names, a guy who received 3 separate payments of $5,000, is a known enforcer for a loan sharking operation out of the city. These are not people you play games with. They don't just break your kneecaps anymore. They ruin your life. They go after your family. They find your assets, and they seize them, one way or another." The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. This wasn't about a gambling addiction anymore. This was about danger. Real, physical danger. Diane hadn't just been covering her brother's stupid bets. She had embroiled our entire lives with violent criminals. She had put a target on our backs. "What do I do, Sarah?" My voice was barely a whisper. All the anger, all the strategic coldness I'd been cultivating evaporated, leaving behind pure, undiluted fear. My first instinct was to call Diane, to scream at her, to demand she tell me everything, to confront Trevor, to what? Get myself beaten to a pulp? "You do nothing," Sarah said, her voice firm, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. "You do not confront them. Not yet. You have no idea how deep this goes or who else is involved. A cornered animal is a dangerous animal, and right now they are cornered. You tipping your hand will only make them more desperate and unpredictable." "So I just sit here and wait for the bank to take my house or some goon to show up at my door?" "No," she said, a new energy in her voice. "You shift your strategy. This isn't just a marital dispute anymore. It's a legal and financial battle for your survival. Forget the emotional reaction for a minute. You need to stop thinking like a husband and start thinking like a plaintiff. You document everything." The word hung in the air. Document. "What do you mean?" "I mean you create a fortress of evidence," she explained, her forensic accountant brain taking over completely. "I'm sending you an email right now with a list. I want you to go through every financial statement you can access, bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios, your mortgage documents. Download and save every single one as a PDF. I want you to create a timeline. Go through your old emails, your text messages. Look for anything related to Trevor, to money, to her being stressed or secretive. Note down dates, times, amounts. Every transfer to her secret account. Every time she mentioned he was in a jam. The day the foreclosure notice arrived. The day she pawned the ring. You create a meticulous, undeniable record of their deception and the financial damage it has caused. You turn your grief into data." Her words cut through the fear, giving me something tangible to hold on to. A mission. It was a reversal of my entire approach. I had been focused on the confrontation, the explosive moment of reckoning. Sarah was offering me a different path, a quieter, colder, and far more lethal one. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice dropping, "I'm going to make a few calls of my own. To a friend who specializes in this kind of asset recovery and another who's a damn good, damn aggressive divorce attorney. You need to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes, and you need to be protected when the truth comes out." I looked around the dark, silent house. It didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger now, infused with a sliver of her resolve. "Okay, I can do that." "Good," she replied. "Don't talk to her. Don't talk to him. If she comes home, be a ghost. You are a collector of facts now, Marcus. That's your only job. Your anger is a liability. Your evidence is your weapon." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The desire to scream and break things was still there, a hot coal in my gut. But Sarah's words had given it a new shape, a purpose. I wouldn't burn myself out with rage. I would channel it. I would turn it into a cold, hard, irrefutable case. I went to my office, turned on the computer, and with the damning foreclosure notice sitting beside me, I began to dig. I was no longer just a betrayed husband. I was building a case against the woman I loved and the family that had destroyed her. The next 2 days were a masterclass in detached, methodical fury. I moved through my house like a phantom, my existence reduced to the glow of a computer screen and the rustle of papers. Diane had come home late the previous night, creeping into the guest room without a word. We were two ghosts haunting the same space, separated by a chasm of lies and a $50,000 debt. I followed Sarah's instructions to the letter. I was no longer a husband. I was an archivist of my own destruction. I downloaded years of statements, my stomach twisting with every newly discovered transfer from our joint savings to her secret account. The narrative of her betrayal was written there in the cold, black and white language of finance. $500 on a Tuesday, $1,000 on a Friday. It was a steady, relentless bleed. I compiled it all into a single, horrifying spreadsheet, the final tally of her secret contributions to Trevor's downfall exceeding $32,000. Our money. My money. The final piece of my plan, the one that felt both necessary and excruciating, was retrieving the ring. I couldn't leave it there, in that grimy shop, a casualty of their chaos. It was the last tangible piece of my family's legacy, and I would not let them have it. Walking into the pawn shop felt like a public shaming. The air was thick with the scent of dust and desperation. A bored-looking man with a stained T-shirt glanced up from a crossword puzzle. "Can I help you?" he grunted. "I'm here about a ring that was sold to you 2 days ago," I said, my voice tight. "A vintage diamond ring." He eyed me suspiciously. "Stuff gets sold here every day, pal. You got a receipt?" I didn't have the yellow carbon copy, that was my evidence, but I had the next best thing. "I have a photograph of it, and a detailed appraisal from a jeweler, and the name of the person who sold it to you." "Diane Thorne?" His eyes flickered with recognition at her name. He knew exactly which ring I was talking about. After a tense negotiation, during which I had to pay him $600, a $200 premium for his trouble, he disappeared into the back. He returned and placed the ring on the counter. Seeing it again, under the harsh fluorescent lights, almost brought me to my knees. It looked small and vulnerable, tainted by its journey. I picked it up. The metal was cold. I slid it into my pocket, the weight of it both a comfort and a burden. That evening, I set the stage. On our polished mahogany dining table, the one we'd bought for our 5th anniversary, I placed 3 items. In the center, I laid down a black velvet cloth. On top of it, I placed my grandmother's ring, its diamond catching the fading evening light, a solitary star in a dark sky. To its left, I placed the bank's foreclosure notice, the words, "Final Notice," a stark red accusation. And to its right, I laid the crisp, freshly printed divorce papers my new attorney had emailed to me that afternoon. Then, I waited. Diane came downstairs an hour later, dressed in sweats, her face pale and drawn. She stopped dead at the entrance to the dining room, her eyes taking in the tableau I had created. She saw the ring first. A choked, strangled gasp escaped her lips. "You got it back," she whispered, taking a tentative step into the room. Her eyes were fixed on the diamond, a flicker of what looked like hope in their depths. "I did," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was sitting in my usual chair at the head of the table, a silent judge in my own home. "No thanks to you." Her gaze finally drifted to the papers sitting beside the ring. She saw the header, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." The fragile hope in her eyes shattered, replaced by sheer panic. "Marcus, no," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, don't do this. We can fix this. I know I messed up. I know I did a terrible thing. But you can't just destroy our marriage over money." The audacity of her statement, after everything, was breathtaking. It was the spark that finally ignited my cold, controlled anger. "Over money?" I repeated, my voice dangerously low. I stood up, my hands flat on the table. "You think this is about money? This was never about the money, Diane. It was about the trust. It was about the partnership. It was about the vows we took." I picked up the ring, holding it between my thumb and forefinger. This ring was supposed to mean something. It meant my grandmother's 60 years of marriage. It meant my parents' 40 years. It meant the 11 years I thought we had. You sold that. You sold our past and our future for $400 to fuel his addiction. "I was trying to protect him," she cried, tears streaming down her face now. "He's my brother. He was in trouble." "And I'm your husband," I roared, the sound echoing in the silent house. Who was protecting me? Who was protecting our home, our future? You destroyed our marriage when you chose his debts over our vows, Diane. "This," I said, gesturing to the divorce papers, "is just the paperwork." "He's family, Marcus," she sobbed, falling back on the one defense she had left. "You're supposed to understand family. You're supposed to help." "I did understand family," I countered, my voice dropping back to an icy calm. I understood that my primary responsibility was to the family we were supposed to be building. The one inside these walls. I understood that, and that's why I'm protecting what's left of mine, which, as it turns out, is just me. I slid the foreclosure notice across the table toward her. On it, the payment deadline, now only 3 days away, was circled in a thick, vicious red marker. "This is the result of your family loyalty. This is what it cost us. We are going to lose this house because of him. Because of you." She stared at the notice, then at the divorce papers, then at the ring in my hand. The reality of her situation, the sheer, unalterable consequences of her choices, finally seemed to be crashing down on her. She had been so focused on Trevor's crisis that she had failed to see she was creating a much bigger one of her own. "Please, Marcus," she whispered, her fight gone, replaced by a hollow desperation. "Don't. There has to be another way." "There was," I said, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. "There were 100 other ways. You could have talked to me, but you chose him. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I placed the ring back on the velvet cloth, a final, beautiful testament to a love that was now officially dead. Our anniversary. 11 years. The reservation at Colleen had been made weeks ago, a symbol of a celebration that now felt like a relic from another lifetime. Canceling it would have been the logical, sensible thing to do, but logic had no place in this endgame. I needed a stage. I needed a final act. I told her we were still going. The request was so bizarre, so disconnected from the reality of the divorce papers sitting on our dining table, that she agreed without a fight. Likely numb and confused enough to just go along with it. Perhaps she thought it was a test, a final, desperate chance for reconciliation. She was wrong. It was a tribunal. We sat at a corner table overlooking the glittering expanse of the city. The view was breathtaking. A million tiny lights promising a world of possibilities, a world we were no longer a part of. Diane was dressed beautifully, a deep blue dress that usually made her eyes sparkle. Tonight they were just dull and empty. She fidgeted with her bare finger, a nervous habit that had developed over the last few days. We didn't speak. The silence between us was a living thing, thick with unspoken accusations and irreparable grief. The waiter came and went, pouring wine we didn't drink, serving food that grew cold on our plates. "Marcus, why are we here?" she finally asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "To torture ourselves?" "I wanted to mark the occasion," I said, my voice flat. "To give our marriage the public ending it deserves, since you handled its private destruction on your own." Her face fell. She had been hoping for an olive branch. I had just handed her a scorpion. Right on cue, a commotion near the restaurant's entrance drew our attention. It was Trevor. He looked wild, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide with a frantic, hunted energy. He wasn't dressed for a place like this. He was in his greasy work jeans and a stained t-shirt. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on our table like a heat-seeking missile. He stormed towards us, ignoring the maitre d' who was scrambling after him, hissing about reservations and decorum. "There you are," Trevor snarled, his voice a low growl as he reached our table. He wasn't looking at Diane. His eyes were locked on me. "I've been calling you all day, you coward. You're not answering." "I've been busy," I said calmly, taking a slow sip of water. "And I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, you're gonna talk to me," he said, leaning over the table, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge. The smell of sweat and desperation wafted off him. "You think you can just blow up our lives and hide behind your fancy lawyers?" Diane looked horrified. "Trevor, stop it. Not here." He ignored her completely. "You cut her off. You're trying to divorce her. After everything she did for you, for us, for family." He spat the word family like it was a curse. This was the moment. The confrontation I had avoided, now taking place on my terms, in my chosen arena. The surrounding tables had fallen silent, the diners watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of shock and fascination. "Let's be very clear about what she did," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through his rage. "She didn't do anything for me. She stole from her husband. She stole a family heirloom that represented generations of trust and commitment. And she did it to enable your addiction." "It's not an addiction," he yelled, slamming his hand on the table. The wine glasses rattled, a few drops of red splashing onto the white tablecloth, like blood. "It was a bad run of luck, and she was helping her brother, something you, Mr. Perfect, would never understand." "I understand perfectly," I countered, leaning forward slightly, meeting his wild gaze with an icy calm. "I understand you have a $50,000 debt to people who don't accept a bad run of luck as payment. I understand that you systematically drained my wife's affection and my bank account to feed that problem. And I understand that you're not angry because I'm divorcing her. You're terrified because the Bank of Marcus has officially closed, and your creditors are coming to collect." The color drained from his face. My knowledge of the specific amount, the real scope of his problem, stunned him into a momentary silence. He had underestimated me. They both had. He recovered quickly, his fear morphing back into rage, but this time it was laced with a new, more potent desperation. "This isn't about gambling anymore," he hissed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, threatening whisper. "These people will hurt her. They know where she lives. They know where you work. They will hurt her to get to me, to get their money. You walking away puts her in danger." It was his last card to play. Guilt. A final, despicable attempt to chain me to their disaster by threatening Diane's safety. A year ago, a week ago, it would have worked. I would have done anything to protect her. But something inside me had irrevocably broken. I looked from Trevor's desperate, sweating face to Diane's, which was a mask of sheer, silent terror. She knew he was telling the truth. She had known the stakes all along and had chosen to play the game anyway. "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you dragged her down with you," I said, the words falling like chips of ice into the silence. "You put her in danger, Trevor. You made the bet. You incurred the debt. You told her to steal from me. This is your doing, not mine." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a pen and the folded divorce papers. I clicked the pen open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet restaurant. I unfolded the documents on the table, smoothed them out, and signed my name on the final page with a steady, deliberate hand. The ink was dark and final against the paper. I looked at Diane. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She was finally seeing the full catastrophic consequence of her loyalty. She had protected her brother, and in doing so had lost her husband, her home, and her future. I stood up, tucking the pen back into my pocket. I pushed the signed papers across the table until they stopped directly in front of her plate of untouched food. "Happy anniversary, Diane," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion but a vast, weary emptiness. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked past the stunned maitre d', through the silent, watching diners, and out into the cool night air. The city lights, which had looked so mocking just an hour before, now seemed distant and indifferent. I didn't know what would happen to her, or to Trevor, or to the $50,000. And for the first time, I realized I didn't care. The restaurant fell silent behind me, a vacuum created by a life that had just ended. She had lost everything for him, and he had nothing to give her in return. The movers were efficient, their movements economical and practiced. They wrapped my armchair in plastic, taped boxes shut with a percussive rip, and carried the pieces of my old life out the door, one by one. I stood by the living room window, watching the truck fill up. Sarah stood beside me, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one of which she handed to me. "It looks so empty," she said quietly, gesturing to the cavernous space that had once been my living room. "It's just stuff," I replied, taking a sip of the hot coffee. It grounded me. The emptiness was here long before the movers showed up. She nodded, understanding. "Have you heard from her?" "Just a text," I said, staring out at the street, asking where she should forward the mail from the debt collectors. Apparently, Trevor's business officially went under. The loan sharks repossessed everything in the garage that wasn't bolted down, and a few things that were. "And her?" "She's living with him in his tiny, rented apartment above a laundromat," I said, the information feeling strangely distant, like a story about people I used to know. "She got a second job waitressing at night to help him make payments. The 50 grand is down to 48, apparently." Sarah shook her head, a sad, frustrated expression on her face. She tethered herself to a sinking stone. "Some bridges aren't worth crossing, Sarah," I said, turning from the window. "And some you just have to burn so you don't get tempted to go back." "This one?" I gestured to the empty house. "This one burned itself." 6 months later, the sterile scent of fresh paint and new beginnings filled my small, 1-bedroom apartment across town. It was a fraction of the size of the house, with a view of a brick wall and a sliver of sky. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every bill that came in the mail was mine, and mine alone. I had a new job at a smaller architectural firm, one that valued creativity over corporate schmoozing. My life was quieter, simpler, and for the first time in over a year, it was peaceful. The foreclosure on the house had gone through. I'd used what little assets I'd managed to shield during the divorce to pay off my share of the remaining debt, leaving me with almost nothing. It was the price of freedom. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Diane was still working 2 jobs, still living with Trevor, still trapped in the vicious cycle of his debt. She had tried to call me once, a few months ago, her voice thick with tears on my voicemail, talking about mistakes and second chances. I deleted it without listening to the end. In the small safe bolted to the floor of my new closet, next to my passport and a few other important documents, sat my grandmother's ring. I took it out sometimes, turning it over in my palm. It was no longer a symbol of my marriage to Diane. The tarnish of her betrayal had been polished away by time and distance. Now, it was something else. It was a reminder that some promises aren't worth keeping when the other person has already broken them into 1,000 pieces. A reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. I never saw Diane or Trevor again. Their chapter in my life was over. The book slammed shut and placed on a high, dusty shelf. Building a new life from the ashes of an old one had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. It had cost me my home, my savings, and a decade of my history. It had cost me everything. But as I stood by my new window, watching a new sunrise paint the sky, I knew I had gained the only thing that was ever truly mine to begin with, my self-respect, and it was priceless.